As I mentioned also last night that parang 90 plus and above of the 2024 batch, the hardest, okay, the lowest score or the lowest rating was history and theory. Unlike yung mga repeaters, yun yung pinakamataas nila nung 2023. So, yeah, examination, the structure is changing every year, especially ngayon. So, although mataas yung passing rate, pero yeah, it's something that it's a very special examination that it could be considered as the most difficult one. So let's see. Then okay. Planning theory. I think yesterday also, I already defined planning theory because we tackled development theory first. It's the macro, di ba? Macro, macro level type of, theory. We have a lot of we have different categories of theory. So this time we're tackling on the planning theory. So I think so I also defined that. Just a moment. Moment. Mm, I think we need to finish really. Let me just go to my own. Okay. Planning theory is the most interesting one because it involves processes. So, okay. I think we can go to, yun na yung next page na yun, yan na yung pinaka. Alright, so, yesterday, I defined planning theory as a level of theory or a group of theories primarily concerned with the processes and methodologies used to guide the development and management of spatial, social, and economic systems. And it focuses on how decisions are made within the context of urban and regional planning, as well as how these decisions impact the physical and social environment. So let's start with that, which is planning a social physics. You need to listen to this very intently because it's something complex, all right? It's something abstract. So planning is social physics. We can consider it as an approach, as a concept, so as a theory foremost. This approach rooted in positivist regional science and regional economics, views planning as a means to uncover presumed natural laws or regular occurrences in social phenomena. The goal is to predict and manage these phenomena more effectively, much like how physical sciences seek to predict natural events. Such a mouthful. Such something like still very abstract. But the key idea here is that by understanding the laws that govern social and economic behavior, planners can design interventions that optimize outcomes such as economic growth, urban development, and resource distribution. So this school of thought often involves the use of quantitative models and data analysis to forecast trends and guide decision-making. Examples include traffic flow models, regional economic impact assessments, and land use planning based on population growth predictions, among others. So in the Philippines, using demographic data and economic indicators to plan for infrastructure development, for example, in rapidly growing urban areas, aligns with the principles of social physics. By predicting population trends, planners can allocate resources more efficiently. Planning and social Darwinism is that it is still a concept that this school of thought applies the principles of natural evolution, such as competition, adaptation, and survival of the fittest, to the study of human society. So it views societies as biological organisms that evolve over time through processes like competition, coevolution, and adaptation. So the key idea here is that planning from this perspective is about understanding and managing the natural forces that shape social evolution. It acknowledges that not all individuals or groups will thrive, and that competition and adaptation are inherent in societal development. This approach may lead to planning strategies that prioritize efficiency, competitiveness, sometimes at the expense of equity. It may justify the focus on growth-oriented policies that favor more fit regions or groups, potentially leading to disparities in development outcomes. For example, the competitive nature of urbanization in the Philippines, where certain cities and regions attract more investment and development opportunities than others, can be seen through the lens of social Darwinism. The survival of the fittest dynamic is evident as some areas rapidly develop while others lag behind. Planning as social engineering views planning as a state function aimed at creating purposive change by directing human behavior through a combination of persuasive and coercive strategies. It emphasizes the role of the state in shaping society according to a specific vision or set of goals. This approach is based on the belief that the state can and should intervene in social and economic affairs to achieve desired outcomes. It involves designing policies. It also involves regulations and programs that influence behavior, often using both incentives. These are, we can call the incentives as persuasive strategies, and regulations or penalties, which we can call coercive strategies. Social engineering can be seen in large-scale planning initiatives where the government seeks to reshape society, such as through urban renewal projects, public health campaigns, or population control measures. In Philippines, the government's efforts to relocate informal settlers from hazard-prone areas to safer planned communities reflect the principles of social engineering. These programs often combine incentives through financial assistance with coercive measures, for example, demolition of illegal settlements to achieve their goals. So these schools of thought in planning offer different lenses through which to understand and approach the complex task of planning, whether focusing on the predictive power of data through social physics, the competitive forces of social evolution, which we can refer to as the social Darwinism, or the state's role in shaping society, the social engineering component. Each perspective provides valuable insights into the planning process. We can go to the next slide. It's a continuation of the major schools of thought in planning. The instrumentalist view of planning holds that planning is a pragmatic tool that should be used to achieve specific outcomes. It does not require a deep theoretical foundation or inherent value. Rather, its worth is determined by its effectiveness in bringing about desired results. Planning from this perspective is about practicality and functionality. It is not bound by any particular ideology or theoretical framework, but is instead focused on solving problems and achieving goals. So this approach often leads to flexible, results-oriented planning that can adapt to changing circumstances and priorities. It may prioritize short-term gains or immediate needs over long-term considerations or theoretical consistency. In the Philippines, instrumentalist planning might be seen in disaster response efforts, where the focus is on quickly and effectively addressing the immediate needs of affected populations. The emphasis is on results such as delivering aid, restoring services, and rebuilding infrastructure, rather than on adhering to a specific planning theory. The next one there, or the last one, is planning as communicative action. This approach to planning focuses on understanding and facilitating social interaction among different sectors of society. Planning is seen as a process of communication and collaboration where the goal is to foster meaningful discourse, harmonize interest, and achieve consensus through dialogue. Planning as communicative action emphasizes the importance of inclusive, participatory processes that engage stakeholders in a collaborative effort to shape development outcomes. It's interpretive, recognizing that different groups may have different perspectives and that planning must accommodate and integrate these views. This approach is often used in contexts where community engagement and stakeholder participation are critical to the success of planning initiatives. It encourages planners to act as facilitators, mediators, and communicators rather than as top-down decision makers. So in the Philippines, the practice of participatory planning in barangays aligns with the principle of communicative action, engaging community members in the planning process, uh, also listening to their concerns and building consensus around development projects are key aspects of this approach. So, for example, the process of formulating barangay development plans, or the BDPs, often involves extensive community consultations and workshops to ensure that the plans reflect the needs and aspirations of the residents. So both the instrumentalist view and planning as communicative action offer valuable perspectives on how planning can be approached. All right, so we can go to the next okay, slide. I think it's still continuation because planning is communicative action. Okay. Yes, sorry about that. There's still a continuation. Critical or radical planning is rooted in the idea of challenging and transforming the existing structures of power, domination, and subjugation in society. It aims also to go beyond conventional planning by addressing the root causes of inequality, oppression, and injustice, among others. So this approach is driven by a desire for social change and emancipation. So I hope you know the meaning of emancipation. Like, this word is associated with CARP, or the application of the Comprehensive Agrarian and Reform Law. So planners who adopt this perspective seek to smash myths or dismantle the ideologies and narratives that perpetuate inequality and marginalization. They work to empower marginalized communities, also mobilize people for collective action, and advocate for structural changes that promote social justice. Critical or radical planning often involves grassroots movements, participatory planning processes, and advocacy for policies that challenge the status quo. It's particularly relevant in contexts where there's significant social and economic inequality or where marginalized groups are excluded from decision-making processes. So in Philippines, critical planning can be seen in efforts to address issues like land reform, as I mentioned earlier, where planners and activists work to redistribute land to poor farmers and challenge the dominance of large landowners. So another example could be the push for urban poor rights. So where planners work with informal settlers to secure land tenure and resist forced evictions. We also have the systems theory of planning. This views the planning process as a complex system, similar to a machine or computer that relies on the continuous flow of information and feedback. This approach emphasizes the iterative, cyclical, and self-feeding nature of planning, where decisions are made based on data analysis and simulations. So planning from a systems theory perspective involves understanding and managing the interconnections and interdependencies within a system. Planners use feedback loops to monitor outcomes, adjust strategies, and improve decision-making over time. This approach is often data-driven and emphasizes the importance of forecasting, simulation, and scenario planning, among others. So because there are a lot of, tools that could be used under the systems theory of planning. Systems theory is particularly useful in managing complex and dynamic environments such as urban systems, environmental planning, and infrastructure development. It allows planners to model different scenarios, also to assess potential impacts and optimize solutions based on real-time data and feedback. So, yeah, one example here is that systems theory could be applied in DRR or DRRM, where planners use data from previous disasters to simulate potential future events. Also, to develop contingency plans and implement early warning systems. Another example could be in transportation planning, where traffic flow simulations and feedback loops help optimize public transit systems. So, critical or radical planning and systems theory of planning represent two different but complementary approaches to planning. While critical planning focuses on challenging and transforming societal structures, systems theory emphasizes the use of data and feedback to manage complex systems effectively. We can go to yeah, instrumentalist point or view of planning. Um, so instrumentalism is the belief that theories are valuable because they help make predictions and guide actions, but they should not be considered literally true or false. Theories are tools that can lead to successful outcomes, and their value lies in how effectively they work in practice rather than in their ability to accurately represent reality. In this view, the usefulness of a theory is determined by its consequences and practical application. If a theory helps achieve the desired results, it's considered valuable, regardless of whether it accurately reflects the underlying reality. So the focus is on what works and produces tangible outcomes. Instrumentalism in planning emphasizes pragmatism and flexibility. So planners who adopt this view are less concerned with adhering to a specific theoretical framework and more focused on using whatever tools and methods will achieve their goals. This approach also or allows also for adaptability in changing circumstances and prioritizes results over theoretical consistency. So in our country, in Philippines, instrumentalism might be reflected in adaptive planning practices where planners use a variety of approaches. Like we have the data-driven models, we have stakeholder consultations, policy interventions, etc., to address issues like urban congestion or disaster management. The success of these approaches is judged by their ability to improve conditions on the ground rather than by their theoretical rigor. John Dewey's influence, okay. So already gave you a full view of instrumentalism or instrumentalist view of planning. I hope you won't forget them or you won't forget this concept during your board exam. So how did Dewey influence um yeah, this one. Uh or planning. John Dewey was a leading figure in the philosophy of pragmatism, which emphasizes the practical consequences of ideas and actions. Dewey believed that knowledge and theories theories should be evaluated based on their ability to solve real-world problems and improve human life. So what's its implication in planning? Dewey's instrumentalism suggests that planning should be seen as a tool for achieving specific goals rather than as an end in itself. Planners should focus on the outcomes of their actions and be willing to adjust their methods based on what works in practice. So this approach encourages innovation, experimentation, and a results-oriented mindset. So we had the key takeaways, pragmatism, flexibility, and being results oriented. Um, so the instrumentalist view of planning encourages planners to focus on practical outcomes and to use theories as tools for action rather than as a rigid framework. So we can go to uh, so of course, all theories, it cannot escape critics, right? So, um, what are those critics on or of instrumentalism? That it lacks. It says here, lack of overall theory or guiding principle. That one of the main criticisms of instrumentalism is that without a guiding theory, all right, or overarching principle, planning actions can become disjointed, segmented, and incoherent. So this approach might work well for short-term specific goals, but over time, the lack of integration can lead to inconsistencies in decision-making and policy implementation. So what do we mean by disjointed and segmented actions? When planning is done on a case by case basis or case to case basis without a unifying work or framework, the resulting actions may not fit together cohesively. So this can create gaps in planning where certain issues are overlooked or lead to contradictions between different initiatives. For example, a transportation project might be developed without considering its impact on housing, leading to disjointed urban development. So case-to-case basis, because instrumentalism tends to treat each situation independently, leading to decisions that are made in isolation from one another. While this might provide flexibility, it can also result in a lack of consistency and long-term vision. Over time, this approach can cause plans to become reactive rather than proactive, addressing problems as they arise without considering broader implications or future needs. Another potential issue is that without a coherent framework, decisions made under instrumentalism may start to negate or nullify each other as circumstances change. For example, policies implemented to address immediate concerns might conflict with or undermine longer-term goals, creating a situation where progress in one area leads to setbacks in another. So in dynamic environments where conditions are constantly changing, the lack of stable theoretical foundation can make it difficult to adapt effectively. Without a consistent guiding principle, planners may struggle to navigate evolving circumstances, leading to ad hoc decisions that fail to address the underlying causes of issues. So we can go to the next slide. All right. So now we're seeing some key figures here, like Charles Lindblom. Um, according to Lindblom, the idea of a single unified public interest is difficult, if not impossible, to define. Instead, what constitutes the public interest is determined through ongoing negotiations, compromises, and adjustments between various stakeholders with differing interests and priorities. In practice, this means that planners must navigate complex political environments where different groups have competing interests. The role of the planner becomes one of mediation, helping to broker compromises and finding common ground that satisfies multiple parties. So planning determined through politics there means that okay, incremental planning acknowledges that political processes heavily influence planning decisions. Plans are often the result of political negotiation rather than purely technical or rational analysis. So I'm trying to provide you the context of planning determined through politics from the viewpoint of disjointed incrementalism or incremental planning. So plans often yeah plan plans are often the result of political negotiation rather than purely technical or rational analysis. This approach emphasizes the importance of understanding the political landscape and the power dynamics that shape decision making. So planners must engage with political actors and understand the motivations and constraints of different stakeholders. The success of a plan may depend more on its political feasibility than on its technical merits. Sounds familiar? Is it still in, is it applicable today? From which when you compare it on this particular period, so probably it's more applicable today, or that's the role of theory, right? So it could serve as a it can predict the future because it's theory. So I would like to continue that planning term through politics means also that the success of a plan may depend more on its political feasibility than on its technical merits, as I mentioned earlier. So, for example, infrastructure projects may be prioritized based on political support rather than on objective assessments of need or efficiency. So again, another viewpoint here is that in incremental planning, what's feasible politically often takes precedence over what's technically optimal or efficient. Planners may need to make compromises to get things done, even if it means sacrificing some level of efficiency or effectiveness. So these are not coming from me, but this is within the context of what we're talking about, disjointed incrementalism. So policy decisions as push and tugged means that incrementalism views policy decisions as a result of a this push and tug between established institutions, interest groups, and political actors. This decentralized bargaining process reflects the dynamics of a free market and a democratic political economy where different interests vie for influence and resources. For example, the process of budget allocation for local government projects often involves negotiations between local leaders, national government agencies, and private sector interests. So the outcome is typically a compromise that reflects the relative power and influence of the involved parties. So it's like a modern day example under policy decisions as push and tug. So um, yeah, again, it will not escape critiques and also implications. Incremental planning. One of the advantages of incremental planning is that it allows for flexibility and adaptability in decision making. It also acknowledges the complex and often unpredictable nature of political process, making it a realistic approach in environments where consensus is difficult to achieve. Now, one of the disadvantages that it mentioned there is that the focus of on short-term, politically feasible decisions can lead to fragmented and incoherent planning outcomes. There's a risk that long-term goals may be neglected in favor of immediate incremental changes. So additionally, the reliance on political negotiations may reinforce existing power structures and inequalities. So incremental planning or disjointed incrementalism. So please remember all these comparisons like it's the alternative terminologies. So you need to remember them all. Incremental planning or disjointed incrementalism offers a pragmatic approach to planning that recognizes the importance of political realities and the need for compromise. While it may not produce the most efficient or comprehensive solutions, it provides a practical framework for navigating complex decision-making processes in dynamic and politically charged environments. So we can go to the next one. It's still a continuation of incremental planning. Remember, it's also called disjointed incrementalism. So I keep repeating that. So we have Robert Dahl and Amita and Enzioni. Okay. So Amita Etzioni. The cognitive limits there, it says policymakers have cognitive limits. They cannot optimize decision making, means the best possible decision. They can only satisfy, means compromise. I hope you won't forget this because you don't have time anymore. You have 1 year preparation, but I'm telling you, 6 months not enough. So you need 1 year. So it's just all right. So at this time, you need already to understand all these concepts, all these theories. Remember, it's not enough to memorize, but yeah, understanding them before memorizing is the best structure of mastery. So cognitive limits there means that, decision makers, including planners and policy makers, have cognitive limits, even us. So this means they cannot process all available information. So that's the context, okay? They cannot process all available information or predict all possible outcomes, which makes it impossible to achieve optimal decision-making in complex situations. So instead of seeking the best possible decision, which is optimization, decision makers settle for satisfactory solution, one that's good enough under the circumstances. So this process is known as satisficing. In the context of planning, this often means making compromises or choosing the most politically feasible option rather than the technically perfect one. So how do you do your response planning if you are with LGU? Probably you must have experience your decision makers who opted for a solution that quickly addresses the immediate needs of the affected population, like temporary shelters instead of um you know being forward looking and proposing for a ano to um what's that for uh, what's that again in DRR? I forgot. Someone unmute. Mm, someone unmute. So what do we mean by temporary shelter? And rather than spending time and resources on a more comprehensive but slower plan, which is permanent housing. Well, I'm talking about how we address housing backlogs, but for DRR, like for DRR purposes, isn't it? Uh, most LGUs are using schools, barangay halls as what?
Evacuation centers.
Evacuation center. Okay, very good. So how many LGUs already have a formal evacuation center na that it's really it's the appropriate evacuation center. So because when you use schools, when you use other facilities of barangays and municipalities or cities, yeah, we disrupt everything, right? We disrupt everything. So that's what we mean, that yeah, they are band-aid solutions, or a quickly yeah solution that quickly addresses the immediate needs. So decision making as a succession of approximations. So that's another viewpoint. Okay, it means that incremental planning sees decision making as an ongoing process of small adjustments and approximations rather than a one-time effort to find the perfect solution. Each decision is a step forward with the understanding that it may need to be revised or adjusted as new information becomes available or as circumstances change. This approach allows for flexibility and adaptability as decisions are revisited and refined over time. However, it contrasts with more comprehensive planning models that attempt to solve problems in a single large-scale effort. In urban development, planners might make incremental improvements to public transportation based on current needs and available resources rather than attempting to overhaul the entire system at once. So that's what we mean by succession, decision making as a succession of approximations. So, well, we can see in this slide some of those influential thinkers. Mel Weber he argued that planning must be pluralistic. What do we mean by pluralistic? Meaning that it should involve multiple perspectives, interests, and stakeholders. So in a pluralistic society, there's no single public interest, but rather a diversity of interests that must be negotiated and balanced. In practice, this means that planners should facilitate dialogue and collaboration among different groups, recognizing that consensus may not always be possible, but compromise is essential. Pluralism in planning reflects the reality of diverse and often conflicting interests in society. So what do we have in Philippines as an example? So maybe not exactly that fit this pluralism in planning, but probably like close to it. So the planning process, for example, for major infrastructure projects such as the construction of a new airport, involves consultations with various stakeholders, including government agencies, private companies, local communities, and environmental groups. So planners must balance these different interests to arrive at a viable plan. Robert Dahl is another influential thinker. He advocated pluralism. All right. So while Mel Weber argued that planning must be pluralistic, Robert Dahl, on the other hand, he's a political theorist, and he was a strong advocate of pluralism in decision making. So do you know the difference now? Okay. It might be asked during your board exam next year. So Robert Dahl believed that power in a democratic society should be distributed among various groups rather than concentrated in the hands of a few. This distribution of power leads to a more balanced and fair decision-making process. That's according to Robert Dahl. In planning, Dahl's ideas support the inclusion of diverse voices in the process, ensuring that decisions reflect the needs and interests of a broad range of stakeholders. Pluralism also helps the dominance of any single interest group in shaping planning outcomes. So in local governments in the Philippines, participatory budgeting processes allow citizens to have a say in how public funds are allocated, ensuring that various community needs are considered. So that's Robert Dahl. How about Amitai Etzioni? He introduced mixed scanning approach as a middle ground between comprehensive, which is rational planning, or between planning and incrementalism. So can you distinguish these two? Between comprehensive planning, which is rational planning, and incrementalism. So it's in the middle ground. Mixed scanning involves combining broad overarching analysis or at the macro level with more detailed focused decision making at the micro level. This approach allows for both long-term vision and short-term adjustments. So it's like what we call the I forgot again. Later I'll tell you. Like a hybrid, okay? So hybrid is not just a platform for, teaching, learning, or something, but hybrid in this particular context, okay? That because it works on both the comprehensive and the incrementalism point of view. So in planning, mixed scanning enables planners to establish general goals and frameworks while remaining flexible enough to make specific decisions as new information or challenges arise. It balances the need for big picture thinking with the reality of limited information and resources. So, for example, in the context of regional development in Philippines, planners might use mixed scanning to set broad development goals. For example, improving transportation infrastructure across the region, while making incremental and project-specific decisions. For example, selecting sites for new roads or bridges based on immediate needs and available funding. So incremental planning or disjointed incrementalism acknowledges the cognitive limits of decision makers and emphasizes the need for a pluralistic approach that involves multiple stakeholders. While so thinkers like Mel Weber, Robert Dahl, and Amitai Etzioni contribute to this understanding, okay, by advocating for pluralism and offering frameworks like mixed scanning that help balance long-term goals with short-term realities. So, can go to the next theory, systems theory. All right. Jen, yeah, okay. So, this is the systems theory of planning. I think when asked in your board exam, so easy to answer because cybernetics, okay, it's at the center of this particular theory. That cybernetics is an interdisciplinary science that deals with communication and control systems in living organisms, machines, and organizations. It focuses on how systems self-regulate through feedback loops and information flow. So in the context of planning, cybernetics involves understanding how different components of a system, such as economic, social, and environmental factors, how these components of a system interact and influence each other. Those that I mentioned. Planners use this knowledge to create systems that can adapt and respond to changes in the environment. For example, urban transportation systems can be seen as cybernetic systems where the flow of vehicles, the input, is monitored, traffic lights are adjusted, the feedback, and the overall traffic situation, the output, is continuously regulated to maintain smooth operation. As a system or system as a unity, all right, so in this perspective, a system is defined as a group of interconnected components that interact to form a unity or integrated whole. The relationships between these components are what tie the system together and enable it to function cohesively. Planners must consider how different elements of a plan are interconnected. For example, in urban planning, transportation, housing, and employment are all part of an integrated system. Changes in one area will impact others or will affect others, so planning must take a holistic approach. For example, in Philippines, we have the Integrated Coastal Zone Management or the ICZM. It may be considered as an example or we can think about that as an example of a systems approach where land use, marine resources, and human activities are planned in a unified way to ensure sustainability. Now, linear and cyclical systems, let's try to break down this concept. Linear system, okay, and this component, all right, a crude depiction of a linear system involves a straightforward process where input is processed. So when we think about when input is being processed, then that's what you call throughput and results in output. This model is useful for understanding basic cause and effect relationships. Cyclical system. So in contrast, a cyclical system represents a free-flowing circuit where feedback loops continuously inform and adjust the process. This is more representative of complex systems where continuous monitoring and adaptation are required. So cyclical systems are particularly relevant in dynamic environments where ongoing feedback and iteration are needed. Planners must create systems that can adapt to changing conditions and new information. So this is not an advice coming from me, or these are not my words, but these are the contents within this particular framework or concepts. So yeah, disaster risk management, okay, um, in Philippines often use a cyclical approach where early warning systems provide feedback that informs evacuation plans, which are then adjusted based on real-time data. All right. So how about it says there flows through the system. And of course, systems theory emphasizes the flow of energy, matter, and information through a system. This flow is regulated by feedback mechanisms that help maintain balance and stability within the system. So planners in this particular framework need to understand how resources and information move through the system they are designing. Efficient flows are essential for the system to function effectively, whether it's in transportation, energy distribution, or communication networks. So in environmental planning, the flow of water through a watershed system is carefully managed to ensure that it supports both human needs and ecological sustainability. What about iteration? Iteration refers to executing the same set of instructions multiple times or until a specified result is achieved. It involves repeating processes and making adjustments based on feedback to refine outcomes. So iteration is critical in planning as it allows for continuous improvement. Planners often go through multiple iterations of a plan, making adjustments based on new data or changing conditions. For example, in infrastructure projects, planners may go through several iterations of design and construction to ensure that the final product meets safety standards and functional requirements. So systems theory of planning provides a framework for understanding the complexity of planning processes. And by viewing planning as a system of interconnected components, planners can better anticipate how changes in one area will impact others. The use of feedback loops and iterative processes ensures that plans can adapt to changing conditions and remain effective over time. This perspective is particularly valuable in addressing complex and dynamic challenges such as urban development, probably in environmental sustainability, as I mentioned about my examples, as or in connection with some of the examples I provided earlier, and these are DRRM, and where a holistic and adaptive approach is essential. So, still in on systems theory of planning, and we can go to the next slide because it's still about systems theory of planning that it involved like a structure and iterative approach to the planning process. So it comprises different steps here that represent different phases in the cycle of planning, from understanding the system to evaluating and controlling so its performance. So systems description there. Yeah, this phase involves scanning the environment, profiling the system, and formulating goals. So it's the initial step where planners gather information about the current state of the system and identify the key issues that need to be addressed. So that's how about system modeling? This phase involves projecting goals, forecasting potential outcomes, and building scenarios. So planners create models of the system to understand how different variables interact and predict future conditions. So system projection involves evaluating the scenarios and projections developed in the modeling phase. So planners assess the feasibility and implications of different scenarios to select the most suitable course of action. So you can see the activities there, like evaluation of scenarios and then projections. Yeah, system protection. In regional development, for example, planners might evaluate different infrastructure projects like road and bridges based on their projected impact on economic growth and environmental sustainability. So we have the system synthesis. So what does this entail? This phase focuses on evaluating and synthesizing alternatives. So planners review the different options available and integrate them into a cohesive plan that aligns with the system's goals. So you have the activities there, evaluation, alternatives, synthesis. So system control is it's considered the final phase, which involves evaluating the performance of the system after the plan has been implemented. So planners monitor the system to ensure that it's functioning as expected and make adjustments as needed. So, yeah, we can have an example in environmental management, particularly, in waste management, for example, the system control might involve monitoring pollution levels after implementing a new waste management system and making adjustments to the plan if the results are not as expected. So, okay, we can go to the next one. It's a systems approach. So these are the variants of systems approach. This time, but it's by George Chadwick. So it's also a structured framework for planning that emphasizes the cyclical nature of decision making and the importance of feedback loops. This approach is particularly useful in complex environments where continuous evaluation and adjustments are necessary. So, for example, problem finding, and that's the first one there you can see on top. The process begins with identifying and defining the problem. Like any other process that we have in your workplace, that you always need to identify problems, right? So this step involves recognizing the issues that need to be addressed and setting the scope of the planning process. So also yeah, because we can only understand we need to understand the problem before moving on to other stages. Goal formulation. All right, you can see goal formulation there. That once the problem is identified, so it's like the 12 steps process, but we are yeah, that's the modern way of structuring a process, but we are far from the 12 steps process because we're still in theories, right? So goal formulation here in this particular approach by George Chadwick, his concept identified, or his structure says that once the problem is identified, the next step is to formulate the goals. And these goals represent the desired outcomes that the planning process aims to achieve. So it could be through goals should be specific, measurable, the SMART, okay? The SMART framework, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So because it provides direction for the planning process, and so serve as benchmarks for success. So okay. Yeah, what are the goals? Like, for example, in transport planning, with our goal might be to reduce traffic congestion by 30%. So within 5 years through the implementation of public transit improvements. So those one of the goal formulation focus. So again, we need to proceed with system description where no, we're still in that Chadwick framework. So yeah, this phase we call system description involves describing the current system in detail. It includes scanning the environment, profiling the system, and understanding the components and their interaction. So accurate system description is crucial for understanding how different elements interact and where interventions are needed. So um, For example, I would like you to listen everything about my examples, because it may not be an exact, exact, or it may not really be a perfect alignment for each of these stages, but at least it could be the closest, in the same manner that when you're answering board questions, you select the most correct answer. You may be doubting that answer, but it could be the closest. So it means that the closest answer is the correct answer, or the most appropriate answer. So it's something like this, because these are this system are universal. So thinking about, or looking for examples to fit this particular stages could be it could not be very exact, but at least it could be the clauses. Like, for example, system description. In environmental planning, system description might involve mapping out ecosystems, identifying sources of pollution, and understanding the relationships between different environmental factors. Just mentioned about how you can describe, you can proceed with the system description phase. Then system modeling. Yeah, planners, Philippine planners, really, only very few are adapted to system modeling, but I hope this batch would be very comfortable about system modeling, that this phase involves creating models of the system to predict how it will behave under different conditions. System modeling allows planners to forecast outcomes based on different scenarios. So modeling helps planners understand the potential impact of different interventions and make informed decisions. For example, in disaster risk management, system modeling might involve simulating the effects of a typhoon on different areas to determine the most vulnerable regions and plan accordingly. So another one is projection of goals. So I hope you're following me in that slide. So okay, system projection. Okay, so just a moment. Um, Similar to so where am I, Jen? Think. Where did I stop? System modeling, right? So projection of goals. Okay. Projection of goals there. I think I mentioned about that goal formulation. Goal formulation is different from, of course, projection of goals, because this phase involves projecting how the goals set in the earlier phase will be achieved through the planning process. Okay, I hope you got that. It requires estimating the potential outcomes of different scenarios. So goal projection helps in assessing the feasibility of achieving the set goals and allows for adjustments if necessary. So for example, in economic planning, and we projecting goals might involve estimating the job creation potential of a new industrial park. So things like that. So system projection as a next phase it's similar to goal projection. System projection involves evaluating the different scenarios and projections developed in the modeling phase. All right. So planners assess the feasibility and implications of different scenarios. This phase helps planners select the most suitable course of action based on the evaluated scenarios. For example, in land use planning, system projection might involve evaluating different zoning options and their impact on urban growth and environmental sustainability. We go to system synthesis. This phase focuses on evaluating and synthesizing alternatives. Planners review different options available and integrate them into a cohesive plan that aligns with the system's goals. So synthesis involves combining the best aspects of different alternatives to create a comprehensive plan. So in infrastructure planning, for example, system synthesis might involve selecting a combination of road, rail, and pedestrian improvements to address transportation needs comprehensively. And we go to evaluation of projection and alternatives. This phase involves evaluating the different projections and alternatives developed in the previous phases. Planners assess the strengths and weaknesses of which option to determine the best course of action. So evaluation ensures that the chosen plan is based on a thorough analysis of all available options. For example, in public health planning, evaluating alternatives might involve comparing different strategies for improving healthcare access, such as building new facilities versus expanding existing ones. So system control, the next phase, this is considered the final phase, which involves monitoring and controlling the system after the plan has been implemented. So planners assess the system's performance and make adjustments as needed. So continuous monitoring and control ensure that the system remains on track to achieve its goals and can adapt to changing conditions. For example, in water resource management, so system control might involve monitoring water quality and availability and adjusting management practices as needed to ensure sustainability. So evaluation of performance there, all right, and evaluation of performance, they're aligned with the okay, so that phase involves evaluating the performance of the system and the implemented plan. So planners assess whether the system is achieving the desired outcomes and identify areas for improvement. So performance evaluation provides feedback for future planning cycles and helps ensure continuous improvements. Okay, so that I would also like to so the feedback loops there. So can you see that side by side, right? That feedback loops are everywhere because yeah, feedback loops are, they are a critical component also of Chadwick's system. They allow for continuous monitoring and adjustment of the plan based on new information and changing conditions. So feedback ensures that the system remains dynamic and adaptable, allowing planners to respond to unforeseen challenges and opportunities. Like, for example, in climate change, adaptation planning, feedback loops might involve regularly updating models and strategies based on the latest climate data and projections. So yeah, Chadwick provided a comprehensive framework for planning that emphasizes problem solving, goal setting through to continuous feedback. So we can go to Radical Theory of Planning by John Friedman. Okay, so I hope you're you need to go back again, keep reading, because not tomorrow, probably during the weekend, we can have a we can have some quizzes or we can have some sure. Jen says short exam, but probably because this entails theories, and I already mentioned to you that batch 2024 had a hard time answering because they expected something like a very objective type of history and theory, but um the the PRB gave the contrary, meaning the application. So when you encounter questions again on application of theory and history, memorization does not work as an isolated strategy, but you need to combine it with mastery. Mastery means that you have understood this and you took this by heart, all right? So makulit ako sa taking it by heart, but it's the only strategy that will make you a top-notcher. Someone there, I think it was Menandro, okay? Serenia. He got 80.55. Number 10 is 80.65, I think. Diba? So 80.65 or 80.8 or something, but it's too close, not even 1 point. It's point something. So 0.0 something. no, point, so you can minus that. 0.8 minus 0.55. So ganun yan sa ka-close. And so masama din yung loob ko because he did not make it to the top. Kasi kung para-pareho, so ang pag-asa lang dyan is madaming tie. So, in the recent board results, number two, there are two people tied in number two, and there were three people tied at number 9. Or two people again, 2-2, okay? Pero kapag si, sana, yung number 10, para pareho sila na 80.8, yung 65 or something, nagtay sana silang tatlo, then nakapasok sana si Menandro. The one na siya yung unang guest natin, speaker yata, so, ikalawa. So he's an architect environmental planner from Palafox. So nang hinayang talaga because I really studied so he got 81, and then in history 80 point something. 80 point, so hindi siya umabot. See? So he lost the chance to be a top notcher. So, and that's why please take things seriously day by day, minute by minute. Okay? Don't be absent. Pag absent kayo, at least parang you you ask permission from Jen so that she can act on it. Pwede rin na listening mode or something if you're in transit or in your mobile, 'di ba? Because imagine, no, pinaghandaan namin yun ng 6 months and yun, diba? So it's very close, like a hairline, apart from becoming number 10. Pero kasi dikit-dikit eh. 80 point ganito, 80.8, 80.8, 80.65, 80.7, parang ganon. So, siguro isang item lang yun, o 2 items lang yun. And the the killer subject is what? History and theory, which was not really which is not really normal in previous board exams, because it should be the easiest kasi very defined ito no? Very defined. Unlike plan implementation and planning processes, you don't know ano yung ilalabas nila. But for history and theory, it's very precise. So, because they changed the strategy from the normal objective type to something, they added another layer, which is analysis. So you need to understand the only way to become a top notcher, right? I'm not even saying to pass, because that's the minimum goal, right? For all of us here. I want you to top, not just pass. I hope I can find potential top notchers in this group, right? So kasi gusto ko lahat kayo, because your success also will be mine. So again, John Friedman, so let me continue. I'm just being a bit emotional on that aspect kasi sayang naman yun, pinaghirapan ng 6 months. So, baka sakali kayo kasi 1 year yung preparation. You need to read every day so that momentum will not drop, okay? Momentum is about building upward and not slide down. Don't slide down. Okay. So, this is John Friedman's radical theory planning, which emphasizes the transformative role of planning in promoting human growth, social learning, and reform. So, and the reason why it's radical. So, you should already have an idea what's radical theory of planning by John Friedman, because it speaks about social learning. It speaks about reform through rational procedures and collective decisions. So planning he says there, planning is promoter. Okay. He said, planning promotes human growth by the use of rational procedures of thought and action. So Friedman sees planning as a tool for human development, using rational procedures of thought and action to identify the best ways to meet human needs. Planning is deeply concerned with aligning goals to collective decisions and strive for comprehensiveness in policies and programs. So planning should go beyond. So according to Friedman, it should go beyond technical exercises and aim to enhance the quality of life and empower communities. It involves not only creating plans, but also ensuring that these plans lead to real positive changes in society. So how do we do that? How do we apply that when we in our planning efforts? We need to, for example, one good example is how can we make our plans inclusive, people-centric, human-centric, because we need to think about the informal settlements. We need to think about, all the marginalized society and who are they, and for example, our planning efforts to upgrade informal settlements can be seen as as promoting human growth. So by providing better housing, sanitation, and access to services, planning can improve the well-being of marginalized populations. And that's how exactly um, John Friedman is trying to impart here in his radical theory of planning. So it also mentioned about meta theoretical problem. Friedman argues that all planning must address the theoretical problem of how to make technical knowledge effective in informing public actions. This involves bridging the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. Planners must not only understand technical aspects, but also consider how this can be translated into policies and actions that are relevant and impactful in the real world. So our as environmental planners in Philippines, we must translate technical knowledge about climate change into actionable policies, such as coastal protection measures and disaster risk reduction strategies. So what happened? What happened with the Chocolate Hills in Bohol, particularly the Chocolate Hills Natural Monument? Isn't it? So that's a classic example. Have they done correctly? Do they have the appropriate strategies on how to, how to protect the UNESCO enrolled or the UNESCO recognized, you know, um, ecosystem? So, I mean, and a lot more in Philippines. So when you pass, so are you someone who would think about this one? Are you someone who could be thoughtful about all these things? So number three there is planning as a link between knowledge and action. Friedman emphasizes that planning is the component that connects technical knowledge with public actions. So it means effective planning ensures that knowledge informs policies, and that these policies are translated into meaningful action. So planners must act as mediators between the technical aspects of planning, like for example, data analysis, modeling, and the practical implementation of policies and programs. For example, in infrastructure development, planning ensures that engineering knowledge about construction and design is translated into policies that guide the actual building of roads, bridges, and other facilities. So how could planners work together or work hand in hand with the engineers, and other technical actors within the LGU at the national level? Um, so that's what it means by planning is a link between knowledge and action. So not and you can also see in that part, we have two diagrams here, right? Knowledge, policies, action. The other one at the bottom is social learning, social reform, social mobilization. So knowledge, policies, action illustrates the relationship between knowledge, policies, and action. That knowledge informs policies, which in turn guide actions. Actions generate new knowledge, creating a continuous cycle. I hope you got that. That's the representation. So planners must ensure that policies are grounded in sound knowledge and that action taken based on these policies are monitored and adjusted as needed. This feedback loop is essential for effective planning. Like public health, for example. Don't you know that um, public health and sanitation, these are the parent professions of urban planning because of a debate called germ versus filth in the US. So we will come to know about this one. So in public health planning, knowledge about disease prevention informs health policies. For example, COVID-19. So it should guide actions such as vaccination campaigns. So if you're someone like a narcissistic view, like you consider vaccination as something like fake news or something. So the outcomes of these actions provide new knowledge which can be used to refine policies. Now, there's another one diagram there: social learning, social reform, social mobilization. So the second diagram emphasizes the interconnectedness of social learning, social reform, social mobilization, that such that social learning leads to reform, which in turn drives mobilization, creating a cycle of continuous improvement and change. So applying that, okay, planning should involve not only technical expertise, but also the participation of communities and stakeholders. Social learning involves communities gaining knowledge and understanding, which drives social reform efforts and mobilizes collective action. So community-based disaster risk reduction programs are an example of this cycle. Communities learn about risk, advocate for reforms, and then such as better infrastructure or early warning systems, and mobilize to implement these changes. So John Friedman's radical theory of planning highlights the transformative power of planning in fostering human growth, social learning, and reform, and that by linking knowledge with action and ensuring that planning addresses both technical and social dimensions, planners can create comprehensive and impactful policies that promote positive change. So we can go to the next one. I think that's the same. Again, first five. Okay. So social action, I hope you're not tired because I'm the one who should be tired, right? While I keep going, you need to keep going and don't sleep over there. So, because I'm the one talking anyway, so the ears is maybe the one who's a bit tired, but I will not be tired for you talking. All right. Social action and the disadvantage. So, okay, there, social action is needed to promote interest of disadvantage because it's radical, right? Radical theory. So Friedman emphasizes the need for social action to promote the interests of disadvantaged groups. Planning should not be just technical exercise, but should also address social inequalities in and empower marginalized communities. So planners should adopt a more activist role. So that's the framework. Advocating for policies and actions that benefit those who are often left out of the decision-making process. And this involves mobilizing communities and creating platforms for their voices to be heard. So in Philippines, probably social action could involve advocating for land reform policies that ensure equitable access for land or to land for small farmers and indigenous peoples. A lot of issues within the indigenous communities and the policies supporting them. And also probably addressing long-standing issues of land ownership and social inequality. So Friedman's framework suggests that planning should be an active process that moves from thought to action. Planners must take on activist roles, mobilizing communities and resources to achieve desired outcomes. So we're not here again. I'd like to say that this framework advocates that planning is not just about creating plans, but also about ensuring that these plans lead to real action, and that planners should work to mobilize society, engaging citizens in the planning process and encouraging collective action. So, and according to Friedman, he enumerated five important aspects of planning. So, territorial and spatial component. So, okay, every planning activity involves a spatial or territorial component. So planning decisions are inherently linked to geography, land use, and the spatial distribution of resources and services. So we must consider, as planners, we must consider how their decisions will impact specific places and communities, because spatial planning is key to ensuring that development is equitable and sustainable. Social rationality there is that it says, yeah, planning activities should respond to social rationality, meaning they should be aligned with the social values, needs, and priorities of the community. And that planning should not be purely technical, but should reflect the social context in which it takes place. So as planners must engage with communities to understand their needs and values, ensuring that plans are socially relevant and responsive. So when we, for example, in disaster recovery planning and understanding the social dynamics of affected communities is crucial to designing interventions that are culturally appropriate and effectively address the needs of the people. Then we are on number three. An important aspect is facilitation and restriction of market activities. We need to understand, we need to take patience on all these things. Planning plays a role in facilitating certain market activities while restricting others that may be harmful. So in some cases, planning may even substitute the market by providing public services or interventions where the market fails. So what does it, how, how do we apply that? I mean, planners must balance the need for economic development with the need to protect public interest, ensuring that market activities do not negatively impact the environment or social equity. So in urban planning, this might involve regulating commercial development to prevent gentrification. I hope by this time, because I will be asking this, I will be mentioning about this like 100 times and for the whole duration of our review about gentrification. So we need to prevent gentrification and displacement of low-income residents while promoting affordable housing projects. The fourth one is planning in the public domain. Planning in the public domain is inherently conflictive and political. So Friedman mentioned, so Friedman said, different groups have competing interests, and planning often involves negotiating and managing these conflicts. Planners must be skilled in conflict resolution. So that's, I'm talking about application of this perspective, planning in the public domain by Friedman. So upon applying it, it is equivalent, or it is tantamount to saying that planners must be skilled in conflict resolution and negotiation, understanding that planning decisions are often contested and require balancing diverse interests. So the last one there is mobilizing society. Successful planning requires massive support and the ability to mobilize society. So planners must engage the public, building consensus and support for their initiatives to ensure that plans are effectively implemented. So public participation and engagement are critical to the success of planning efforts. So planners should work to create broad-based support for their initiatives, ensuring that the community is actively involved in the process. So mobilizing society might involve engaging citizens in conservation efforts such as tree planting campaigns or community-based waste management programs as those common examples within this perspective to build a sense of ownership and responsibility for the environment. So John Friedman's radical theory of planning emphasizes the importance of social action, activism, and mobilization in addressing the needs of the disadvantaged. We can go to the next slide. So, advocacy planning. We're now we just left the radical, but of course it's like a they are in the same regime, you know, of schools of thought or perspectives, because advocacy planning, uh you can see there it's a concept uh, championed by Paul Davidoff, which focuses on still empowering marginalized and disenfranchised communities through the planning process. You see how important the planning process in those era. This approach is rooted in the idea that planners should not just be neutral technicians, but active advocates for social justice and equity. So advocacy or activist planning is the idea that planners should actively advocate for those who are powerless and disenfranchised. The primary goals of advocacy planning are social justice and equity, particularly in housing, service provision, and environmental management. So within this framework, planners adopting this approach prioritize the needs of marginalized communities and work to ensure that their voices are heard in the planning process. This often involves challenging established power structures and advocating for policies that redistribute resources and opportunities to those who need them most. So, for example, if we advocate or we have advocacy planning efforts, uh, which might involve working with informal settlers to secure land tenure and or the indigenous communities to improve living conditions of these marginalized groups. So rather than displacing them in favor of commercial development. So it's something like because social social impact assessment is also a big part in the EIA process. So it's something like these are interconnected, and we have, as we build up our knowledge and our expertise or the mastery processes that we need to do, we will come into that point that we are able to stitch or to think quickly, because we need to have all these theories available at our fingertips. We don't need to read again and again and again, but because we already mastered. So I would like you to be in that condition or in that situation in the near future. So not in the far future. So um and of course, I'm still here in advocacy planning because I'm very passionate about advocacy planning. It also involves redistribution of power and resources. So advocacy planning emphasizes the need to redistribute power and resources to the powerless and disadvantaged, because planners should defend the interests of weak and poor communities against the established powers of business and government. This requires planners to take on a more confrontational role. I'm not saying that you need to be very confrontational, but these are the words, these are the content, these are the contents of this framework. Okay, did that come from me? So it requires planners to take on a more confrontational role, pushing back against policies and practices that perpetuate inequality and advocating for those who are often excluded from decision-making process. So, for example, advocacy planners might oppose urban renewal projects that displace low-income residents without providing adequate compensation or alternative housing options. So this is where most of those in the past of those gentrification events took place in both the UK and in the US, most especially. So Paul Davidoff and advocacy planning within this regime or this era, Paul Davidoff often referred to as the father of advocacy planning. Please don't forget. He introduced the idea that planning should involve the development of plural plans, right? So rather than a single unitary plan, he argued that the concept of the public interest is not scientific, but political, meaning that planning should account for the diverse needs and interests of different groups in society. Davidoff's approach suggests that planners should engage with multiple stakeholders and create plans that reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. This often means developing alternative plans that cater to different groups rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all solution. So, hero, victim, villain triangle. You can see that hero, victim, villain, and then at the center, there's the problem there. Okay, that's the diagram that depicts the framework or the concept. So the triangle depicted in that slide, I hope you can see it, symbolizes the dynamic of advocacy planning. The planner is the hero, I hope so, advocates for the victim, the disadvantaged community, and confronts the villain, means the established power structures or policies that perpetuate inequality. This framework highlights the adversarial nature of advocacy planning, where planners actively challenge injustices on behalf of marginalized groups. So planners, that's why it's a noble job, because planners adopting this framework see themselves as champions of social justice, working to empower victims of inequality and holding those in power accountable in this particular framework, all right? So in environmental justice, advocacy planners might confront industries that pollute low-income neighborhoods, advocating for stricter regulations and remediation efforts to protect the health and well-being of affected communities, and many more, and many other scenarios. So advocacy planning, as articulated by Paul Davidoff, is a call to action, actually, for planners during that period to go beyond traditional roles and become advocates for social justices. So, okay, how many slides do we have more, Jen? Because, because okay, 1, 2, 3, okay, because I need to, baka kasi maputol yung advocacy planning, so we can go to the last slide probably. Yeah, we fell short of the time actually. Dapat kasi ano, please come at 9 p.m. or at least 9:15, gano'n na, para so that you would appreciate or you would be able to capture all this one. Okay, so I would end in this slide because pag sinabing era or regime or hindi lang isa yung planner or thinker or theories, they come in groups, they come in teams, they come in clusters. So Saul David Alinsky, he wrote the book Rule for Radicals in 1971. Alinsky is known for his approach to community organizing and conflict confrontation as a means of challenging the status quo. His philosophy emphasizes the victimization of the marginalized and the need for grassroots mobilization to confront and hold the state accountable. So Alinsky's approach advocates for direct action and organizing marginalized communities to demand their rights. While he rejects the Marxist Maoist ideology of state takeover, his methods focus on empowering communities to pressure the state to live up to his own principles. Lumabas sa exam yung si Karl Marx, okay? So, that labor, I think the question was labor being commodity, something like that. So Karl Marx. But in this particular concept of Saul David Alinsky, um, he his methods focus on empowering communities to pressure the state to live up to its own principles. So okay, Sherry Arnstein, she wrote 8 rungs in the ladder of citizen participation in 1969. So the book came first before the Rules for Radicals in 1971. Arnstein's work is foundational in understanding citizen participation. All right, hindi naman siguro kayo magkakamali dito because nakalagay naman citizen participation, so it should be easy to, you know, when you memorize or making yourself familiar with all these things, you know, with all this information, voluminous information, massive information. So you can do that by association. You associate something with what you can remember quickly, all right? Yung mabilis o madaling ma, 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 maintindihan or madaling ma-remember. So Arnstein's work is foundational in understanding citizen participation and planning. Her ladder of participation outlines different levels of citizen involvement, from manipulation and tokenism to full citizen power. Advocacy planners can use Einstein's framework to assess and enhance the level of participation in planning processes, ensuring that communities are genuinely involved in decision making. So this is something about participatory approach or grassroots, right? The bottom up probably. So a lot um a, a lot of framework already available today to empower empower the community. So Alan Heskin in 1977, he wrote Concepts of Empowerment. Heskin's work focuses on the idea of empowerment in planning, emphasizing the need for communities to have control over decisions that affect their lives. So empowerment involves building the capacity of marginalized groups to influence planning outcomes. So as planners, can adopt empowerment strategies to ensure that communities are not just passive recipients of planning, but active participants with real decision-making power. So I'm reminded about the land use process that we have that yeah, the different stakeholders, different categories, like the more the merrier. So when you include everyone there, so it falls within that category of the more the merrier kind of stakeholder participation. So okay, uh, that's just a side comment, but I would like to be on track again. Norman Krumholz is the originator of transactive planning. Krumholz developed the concept of transactive planning, which emphasizes the interaction between planners and the public. Transactive planning. So it involves a dialogue where both planners and communities learn from each other, and planning is seen as a collaborative process. Transactive planning encourages planners to move away from top-down approaches and instead engage in meaningful exchanges with communities, co-creating plans that reflect shared knowledge and goals. So we will depart from any of these things first because we have modern concepts already, but we need to concentrate first because otherwise it will add to your confusion and to your, to you might be stress about the massive information that I'm providing you. Malayo pa yung exam, but probably you're wondering now why mag-11 na, hindi ko pa rin kayo, no, dinidismiss. But this is for you guys. Ako naman yung mapapagod, di ba? So, I just need you to lend your ears. So, um, so I don't have problem. I'm already ENP. So, kayo, I also need you to become ENPs. Okay, we need to grow the number of environmental planners, and through you, mas madami pang mapaproduce tayo na magagaling na planners like you will be soon in 2025. So, okay. Norman Crumholz, um, so I mentioned about moving away from top-down approaches and instead engage in meaningful exchanges. All right. So there's Thomas Rainer, and he also wrote A Choice Theory of Planning. It highlights the importance of providing communities with choices, okay, in the planning process. So you see, you don't even need to memorize because the keyword is choice theory. And then yung maghanap lang naman kayo because of course A to D or A to E, nandun yung answer. So why do you need to be overthinking, right? You cannot really do away, nandun lang sa apat na yun, A, B, C, D, E, yung choice. So, ang dali-daling makapasa, ang dali-dali ding mag-top sana, no? So, that's my prayer for all of you. So, Thomas Rainer, when we apply choice theory of planning, it is asking about advocacy planners should present multiple planning alternatives to communities, allowing them to choose the path that best aligns with their values and goals. So probably it rings a bell to you, or it sounds familiar because you are practicing or you're doing the 12 steps process of CLUP, but first we're here in the context of theory and planning. So it's also good to imagine and put some images in your mind while reading this one. But of course, I need you to bring you again in this context. Okay, so in transportation planning, for example, we offering communities a range of options such as improving public transit or enhancing walkability or expanding road infrastructure empowers them to decide on the most appropriate solution for their context. Of course, in transportation planning, it's a highly technical activity, or so sometimes we miss, yeah, collaborating or thinking with the stakeholders. So normally we're just there doing modeling and boom, we have a solution to our transport problems. So but this framework is providing and explaining about choice theory of planning. So David Mazziotti, he wrote the underlying assumptions of advocacy planning. His work explored the underlying assumptions of advocacy planning, particularly the belief that planning should be political and oriented towards social justice. He argues that planners should actively challenge power imbalances and advocate for the needs of marginalized groups. So I'm sure you're now confused, di ba? Kasi halos lahat sila, it's about marginalized groups. But you need to have the keywords there, remember them, so you will remember them all. He argues that planners, must be aware of their own assumptions and biases, ensuring that their work is grounded in a commitment to equity and justice. So, yeah, I think we're here. Yeah, we can leave here. So I would like to conclude or provide you a closing statement in this particular review lecture that in environmental planning, advocacy planners might challenge development projects that disproportionately impact low-income communities, advocating for alternatives that prioritize environmental justice. So thank you for tonight. And tomorrow we will do communicative planning by Georgian Habermas. So tonight. Thank you all for taking the patience if you're still awake. So, okay lang kayo?